Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, probably the single most frustrating management issue out there, accountability in the workplace.
It really is, isn't it?
It's this huge paradox. You hear leaders complaining all the time, if only my team were more accountable, but then you talk to the team members.
And they see the exact opposite. Management never holds anyone accountable around here.
Right, so everyone's frustrated, everyone agrees it's important, but somehow it just stays elusive.
It is this massive organizational pain point. And our mission today, really, is to unpack why. What the sources we looked at suggest is that the problem isn't usually the people. It's the architecture, the systems we build.
Architecture, how so?
Well, we tend to approach accountability like it's this punitive control thing, like we need to catch people doing wrong. And that basic mistake, that faulty foundation, it actually works against getting the results we want. It turns a potential support tool into basically a threat.
Okay, so the big breakthrough idea here, the shift we need, is a total redefinition. Stop thinking blame, start thinking support. It's exactly.
Accountability as just keeping track.
Yeah.
A matter-of-fact accounting of what was promised versus what happened.
Yeah.
No judgment attached.
Precisely. Take the judgment out, and suddenly it becomes useful again. That shift changes absolutely everything.
Okay.
Yeah, what we often see happening is what some call the blueprint problem. You know, organizations think they need accountability, so they build courtrooms, they set up surveillance.
Right. Watching everyone.
Yeah, when what they actually need are things like coaching spaces,
Yeah.
support structures, the intention, the goal of improving. It's usually there, but the design is just fundamentally off.
No, and the result of that bad design,
Yeah.
the word accountable itself becomes toxic.
Totally.
It becomes code.
Right.
If a manager says, we need accountability for this, everyone hears.
Someone's head is going to roll, or who gets fired?
Yeah, exactly. And that fear, that constant association with blame, it's paralyzing. It makes managers, frankly, just avoid the difficult conversations altogether. Which, of course, leads straight to that culture where nobody feels truly responsible because the difficult conversations never happen constructively.
So going back to the root, you said accountability is just a count.
Yeah, if you strip it right back, linguistically, it's about accounting. Like bookkeeping.
Yeah.
A transaction. What was agreed? What was delivered? Keep it factual.
Okay.
Compare results produced to results promised. Simple as that. When you ditch the moral judgment, the sort of finger pointing.
It becomes functional again.
Exactly. It restores its actual utility.
It lowers the stakes dramatically, which feels crucial for getting people to actually, engage with it instead of run from it.
Right.
The sources had a neat analogy for this, didn't they? Checking your car's dashboard.
Yeah, I like that one. You glance down, see you're doing 80 in a 65 zone.
Mm-hmm.
What do?
You adjust, ease off the gas.
Right. There's no big drama, no internal shame spiral, usually no external blame unless you get pulled over, but internally,
It's just feedback.
it's just immediate objective feedback.
Yeah.
Data. And that data allows you to correct your course. The goal is to build workplace systems that allow for that same kind of quick, non-shaming adjustment.
Okay, so if we want to build that kind of supportive system, that better architecture, where do we start? What's the foundation?
The sources are really clear on this. The foundation has to be integrity.
Integrity. Now, most people hear that and think morality, right? Being a good person.
Correct. But that's not quite how it's used here. We need to think about integrity in its more literal, almost physical sense. Integration.
Integration, like bringing things together.
Exactly. Bringing your words and your actions into alignment. Integration means they match up.
Ah, so if your words and actions are integrated, you're reliable.
You are reliable. You can be counted on. And that's the key difference. Reliability is something we can actually track and measure. Abstract virtue. Much harder. This creates a practical transactional basis for performance. People can trust the inputs.
That makes Stephen R. Covey's famous quote really hit different then. The key to growth is to learn to make promises and to keep them. It's about reliability.
It's entirely about reliability in this context. That's the core managerial distinction. See, without clear, explicit promises that people voluntarily make.
What are your management systems then?
They're basically just weather tracking systems. That's what one source called it. You're just watching results happen after the fact. You can analyze them, complain about them.
But you can't influence them?
You have no leverage because there was no explicit commitment up front to track or support or hold anyone accountable for. You're just observing the weather.
Okay, so integrity as reliability is the foundation. Let's build on that. What are the pillars, the structural elements needed for this supportive accountability?
Right. 3 main pillars emerge. Pillar 1 is absolutely non-negotiable. Clear agreements and promises.
Makes sense. You can't hold someone accountable for something fuzzy or implied.
Never works. Vague expectations, assumptions, they're recipes for conflict. Clarity is where empowerment starts.
So how do you get that clarity?
Well, the sources suggest any clear request needs three things. One, it has to be direct. Use unambiguous language like I ask that you.
No beating around the bush.
None. Second, it must be specific. Not do better, but say, deliver a report outlining year-to-date sales data for the Western region. Get granular.
Got it. Specific.
And third,
Time-bound. Needs a deadline. By December 20th at 5 p.m. When a request has those three things, direct, specific, time-bound, there's really no room for misunderstanding the promise being asked for.
and this is crucial, the sources say there are only two valid responses to a request like that.
Just two, yes or no?
What about maybe, or I'll try?
Maybe, they argue, is just a recipe for disappointment down the line. It's not a real commitment. I'll try isn't a commitment either. It needs to be a clear yes or a clear no.
Okay, but the no part, that feels like a big hurdle.
It is, and this leads to maybe the most critical and often overlooked prerequisite for this whole thing to work. People must have real, genuine permission to say no.
Why is that so important? Because if they can't say no, if a yes is coerced or forced out of fear or obligation, it's not a real promise anymore.
It's just compliance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's compliance. And what does compliance breed? Not engagement, not ownership. It breeds resignation. People just check out.
Okay, let's push on that, though, because that sounds great in theory, but let's get practical. I'm a manager, I've got targets to hit, deadlines looming, my best person is already swamped. If I make a clear request and they legitimately say, no, I can't take that on right now, what happens? How does the work actually get done? Doesn't the system risk things just falling through the cracks?
That's the million-dollar question, right? But here's the power of it. That no forces a necessary conversation that should be happening anyway.
A negotiate.
A negotiation, exactly.
Right.
The no isn't personal. It's about capacity or priority. It forces you, the manager, to actually manage to prioritize, to reallocate, maybe to get more resources, or to decide what doesn't get done.
Instead of just accepting a weak yes, they probably can't deliver on.
Precisely. When you force compliance, you get that surface-level agreement, but underneath, you get resignation. That looks like, quiet quitting, minimum effort, passive resistance, work slowdowns.
All the things managers complain about.
Right. By allowing the no, you force the reality of the situation to the surface immediately. It shifts the dynamic from coercion to collaboration to actual problem solving. You ensure that only promises people truly believe they can keep enter the system. That's the only kind of promise you can build accountability around.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It forces the difficult priority calls up front.
Okay, so clear, voluntary promises are pillar 1. What's next? How do we measure success?
That brings us to pillar 2, co-created key performance indicators, or KPIs.
Right, the metrics. You need objective measurement.
Otherwise,
Interpretation takes over. And interpretation leads straight back to arguments and blame. You need clear, agreed-upon ways to know if the promise was kept.
But here's another place organizations often trip up, isn't it?
Definitely. The common mistake is imposing metrics from the top down. Here are your targets, hit them.
Which feels like...
Surveillance.
Yeah.
Control, not support. The employee has no buy-in.
So the empowering way, the way that fits this model.
It flips the script. The manager's job is to first help the individual connect their role to the bigger picture. Help them define their own kind of inspirational sub-purpose.
Inspirational sub-purpose, like how their specific job moves the needle on the mission in a way that actually matters to them.
Exactly. Find that personal connection, that why. Then, once that purpose is clear and motivating, you work together to define the KPIs. What measures will show effectiveness in fulfilling that purpose?
So the KPIs become tools they use to track their own progress towards a goal they care about.
Precisely. It's co-creation. Measurement becomes a supportive tool, not a weapon.
Okay, pillar 1, clear voluntary promises. Pillar 2, co-created KPIs linked to purpose. What's the third pillar?
Pillar 3 is the follow-through, regular non-judgmental review. The accounting part needs to happen consistently and quickly. Crucially important. Letting results pile up for months before review just invites emotion, baggage, defensiveness, all the things that derail accountability. Keep the feedback loop short and objective.
And when you have these review conversations, how do you keep them supportive, not punitive? The sources mention two key elements.
Yes, first, leaders must make a conscious effort to celebrate successes.
Why is that so critical?
Because our brains, and frankly most organizational cultures, are wired to focus on the negative. The inner critic is loud. Leaders need to actively counterbalance that. Shine a spotlight on what went right. Acknowledge wins. Because success genuinely breeds more success. It builds confidence and momentum.
Okay, celebrate wins. What's the second element?
Second, you have to acknowledge failures, meaning times when the promise wasn't met. And this is the key, do it matter-of-factly.
Just the fact.
Just the facts. Here was the promise, here was the result. No judgment, no blame, no excuses allowed in that initial assessment. And you have to be vigilant about not letting shame creep in.
Because shame triggers.
Defensiveness.
Yeah.
Immediately. It shuts down learning, shuts down problem solving, shuts down the person. So state the gap, factually.
And then, here's where it gets really interesting, right? The conversation shifts immediately after that factual check-in.
Instantly. Once you've noted the facts, celebrated success, or acknowledged a miss, the entire focus pivots to the coaching conversation.
So instead of, why did you screw this up?
Right. Instead of the punitive, what's wrong with you, or why didn't you hit the goal, the frame becomes supportive. It's, okay, so we didn't meet the promise here. What got in the way? What barriers, internal, maybe mindset or skill, or external, like resources or roadblocks, what impeded performance?
And crucially,
How can I, as your leader, help you? What support do you need from me to break through those barriers next time?
that changes the leader's role completely.
Totally. You shift from judge and jury to coach and support system.
Right.
But this requires real leadership first. You have to inspire people with purpose before you try to manage them with promises and KPIs.
Right. You can't hold people accountable for promises they never really bought into, for a mission they don't care about.
Exactly. Without that inspired commitment up front, any management system, no matter how well designed, will feel like coercion. Leadership has to come first.
So does this architecture actually work in the real world? Is there proof this shift from control to support delivers?
There is. The sources highlighted a really compelling case study as a nonprofit primary care provider. Pretty large, 15 sites, about 1,000 employees.
And what was their situation?
They were in trouble, losing money. Specifically, they'd lost 2% of their revenue year after year for 5 straight years. For a nonprofit, that's a crisis.
Wow. Okay, so what did they do? Did they double down on control?
Well, their first instinct was probably that, yeah, more audits, more top-down directive, the typical blueprint problem response. But instead, they took a different path. They decided to invest in building this culture of integrity.
So they trained their managers on these principles: clear promises, co-created goals, supportive reviews.
Exactly. They stopped blaming the managers and started equipping them, taught them how to lead first, then manage and coach, using this supportive framework.
And the results?
Pretty stunning, actually. Within just 1 year, 12 months,
Yeah.
they completely reversed the trend. They went from losing 2% annually to achieving a 1% surplus.
Whoa. That's a 3% swing in revenue in a year for a Medicaid-funded nonprofit.
Incredible, right?
Right.
And it wasn't just the money. At the same time, their patient outcomes improved so much, they started winning industry awards for quality of care.
That's powerful. It suggests when you remove the fear and build trust and support.
Performance doesn't just stabilize, it can actually soar. Engagement goes up, results follow. It really highlights the choice organizations face.
Which is?
Do you keep building punitive systems that aim for compliance through fear, which, as we've seen, often just leads to resignation and checking out? Or do you intentionally architect a culture of integrity, one that inspires genuine ownership through purpose and support?
Which leads to real engagement.
And potentially extraordinary results.
That weather analogy comes back here. Most companies are just watching the weather, right? Analyzing past performance, complaining about the results.
Exactly, passive observers. But organizations that implement this kind of supportive accountability architecture,
They start to make the weather.
they gain influence over the outcomes because they're shaping the inputs, the promises, the support, the focus. They're actively creating the conditions for success.
So for listeners thinking about their own teams or organizations, how can they start to assess where they stand? You mentioned an accountability audit.
Yeah, based on the sources, instead of a long checklist, maybe reflect on these 4 core questions. They cut right to the heart of it.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, when you communicate expectations, are they consistently, explicitly clear? Or are you relying too much on assumptions, on people just somehow knowing what's needed?
Good question. Implicit versus explicit. What's second?
Second, do your team members have clear, measurable KPIs that they genuinely helped create? And critically, do those KPIs connect to a sense of purpose they find meaningful in their role?
Okay. Purpose-driven, co-created metrics.
Third, think about your feedback patterns. Are you dedicating as much time and energy to genuinely celebrating successes as you are to addressing failures or gaps? What's that ratio look like in practice?
The balance of feedback. Important. And the last one.
And fourth, perhaps the foundation for it all, have you truly fostered an environment of genuine commitment? Meaning, is there an inspiring purpose people buy into? And do they feel they have real permission to say no, ensuring that the promises made are voluntary and reliable, not just forced compliance?
Those 4 questions really get to the core of whether you're building a culture of fear or one of ownership.
They absolutely do.
And thinking about the gap, between where someone might be now and hitting those standards, the key takeaway isn't to feel bad about it.
Not at all. That gap isn't a sign of failure. It's simply your starting point. It shows you where the opportunity lies to start building a better, more effective, and frankly, more human architecture for accountability.